So this is my monthly plug for NCU, and I want to start it off with something that I have to remind myself a lot. I have been an academic for my entire adult life, and I have to constantly remind myself not to be a Pharisee. Now, around my church, there are warnings circulated that we have to be careful not to be Pharisees, and what they're usually talking about is you have to be careful not to be legalistic. I don't exactly mean that, I mean something slightly different. I mean that the Pharisees, who set out to try to be devout, the great motivating force in their life was that they wanted to know God's will. They wanted to decode what God had given them and figure out what was it going to look like when the Messiah came. And so they studied it. With they studied it until their lives began to break down. They studied it, they didn't get enough sleep, they didn't spend time with their families. You read about some of the surviving biographies of the great rabbis, and they would brag that they studied Torah 20 hours a day, 22 hours a day, because they thought that doing all of that, pouring themselves into that enterprise, meant that that was the best way to show their devotion, their allegiance to God. And you know the story. You know what happened when the Messiah came. The Pharisees read the rules back to God and said, this can't be the Messiah. This is not what we expected. We expected someone who was going to raise an army and topple the Roman occupation. We also expected that instantly we would wake up the morning after the Messiah came and there would be justice and obedience to God throughout the world. This Jesus person is a hick from a backwater, and we are still occupied by the Romans, so this is obviously not the Messiah. And they were so intelligent and so learned and had put so much work into perfecting their knowledge, but doing it by their own methods and with their own assumptions, that all their motivation was completely squandered, and they made the most tragic but necessary mistake in all of history. So, why do I bring that up at the beginning of a plug for NCU? I do that because I have, a few times over the past several weeks, either talked to or read some homeschooled students talking about what colleges are on their short list. And I worry that maybe you're being a little bit pharisaical in the sense that I mean it when I say I have to be careful in my academic work not to get so confident in my studying and in my research that I try to read the rules back to God. What I see people say when they talk about the schools that they've lined up that they're looking at, they talk about schools whose reputation will open doors. They talk about schools that have world-class faculty. They talk about schools that have enormous amounts of money and therefore huge opportunities for the students. I've been at a couple of those schools. I have been at a very nicely endowed private school as an undergraduate and a grad student and teaching assistant. And my first job out of graduate school, I was a faculty member at Arizona State University, which has world-class scholars on its faculty and has a lot of opportunities around campus, a lot of study abroad, exciting study abroad opportunities, a lot of exciting internship connections. And if you sign up, if you put yourself into an organization like that, superficially, you are going to find that a lot of doors open to you, and it feels as though you've really hit the jackpot. And I trust that everybody who is working on the decision, where do I want to go to college, that you're doing it prayerfully, that you're putting God out in front of it, and you're saying, God, what I want is I want my life to fulfill whatever your purpose is for me. I want to be obedient. I know that you have a plan for me, and I want to continue along the path you've laid out for me. What I'm afraid is that we've made decisions for ourselves. We've already set the assumptions in place as to what that plan has to look like. And that you measure the strength of the school according to the size of its endowment, the shininess of its toys, the size of its buildings, whether you've heard of the faculty and what kind of reputation the faculty has. This is a point that I made in one previous video, but I'm going to make it again. Are you remembering that all those things are worldly measures? Are you remembering what God told Samuel when Samuel went out to anoint David? Now you might be thinking, I'm reverse engineering this argument because I am at a small school, which honestly, I would say we have one faculty member who is a world-class renowned scholar, and he's our New Testament professor. He is currently about to publish his 10th book. He gives keynotes at international conferences on the study of the Bible. All the rest of us, we came here because we love to teach. And it is very, very rare that a college professor at a teaching college develops a worldwide reputation, because the way that you develop your worldwide reputation is to pour yourself into research, into being a little bit of a Pharisee. Now, I'm not anti-research. Research makes the world better. But when you pour yourself into it and you measure whether you are successful and worthwhile by how much of it that you do, that's a shortcoming. A couple more things that you need to watch out for if your measures aren't quite the measures that God may be using in arranging the plan for you. One of them is that schools that have world-renowned faculty very often, and I speak from experience, I testify to what I have seen, very often have rivalries. Because people who have accomplished that much, you've probably seen it just in the forensics community. People who accomplish a lot, people who are told day after day how successful they are. Because we have a sin nature, we internalize that. And when you have multiple world-class faculty under the same roof, very often they become hypersensitive to little slights, to someone else getting attention. And you might think, well, what do I care if faculty bicker with one another? But what they often use as their weapons in their little turf wars are students. Will they approve this particular student for this program, for this class? Will they take this student on as a research assistant? Well, this student, I've seen this student take classes from this other professor, and they have a very warm and positive relationship, so obviously this student is a follower of that professor. It's almost like what Paul writes about, I follow Paul, I follow Cephas, I follow Apollos. You see that a lot in schools where you have a lot of very, very famous faculty. They use students as proxies to establish and maintain the pecking order, to put people in their place. And that's not a very good way to live if you're a student. I'll also point out that NCU has no football team and no Greek system. What do we have? We have student ministries. We have a student government, and the student government tries to be a voice for the student body in talking to the administration, and the student government brings about some changes around the campus. The most experienced and most involved member of my forensics team, Eric, he's been a vice president of student government every year he's been here. But the biggest center of student activity outside of the classroom at NCU is student ministries. We do several mission trips a year, both international and inside the United States, and we do a lot of mission outreach right in our own backyard. We're across the street from U of O, and there are lots of opportunities for us to be effective in reaching out to that community. We are just 5 or 6 blocks from downtown Eugene, Oregon, and Eugene, Oregon has an Amtrak station within walking distance of the downtown, which means that we have a lot of homeless people, and we have a lot of runaway kids. And we do events, probably 2 or 3 a month, where we reach out and we minister. And if we have any excess energy after studying, that's where that energy goes. And I think that what Jesus said about storing your treasure in heaven, don't heap up for yourself treasure here on earth, but make treasure in heaven. Go and sell all you have and give it to the poor, and then come and follow me. That's the kind of school I teach at. And my experience, having been at bigger schools, at more well-funded schools, at schools where I was surrounded by scholars of world-class reputation, and then having been here, I think that the difference I make here is a difference less measured in worldly terms, but it is a difference that is more meaningful and more purposeful. And it's the kind of thing where it just becomes natural to me every day to pray to God for help, because we certainly are not surrounded by the kind of resources that are going to let us go out with mighty leverage and mighty strength and take on challenges ourselves. All we can do is pray in complete dependence on God and say that we offer up our poor offerings and that we trust God to come alongside us, to fill us with His Spirit, to make the world a different and better place. To do it both inside the classroom as we prepare students who are going to go out and impact their workplace, and to do it on the weekends in the afternoons in our ministry outings. One last thing, and I said this in, I think, the first video that I did to plug NCU. I do not ever want to put the hard sell on anybody. You gotta come to NCU. You should come to NCU. NCU is a perfect fit for you, because I don't think that's the kind of thing we've ever had to do here. I think that God picks the people who are going to thrive here. And what I have seen happen over and over again is as soon as they are aware that we are here, and especially after they've paid a visit to the campus and talked to other students, you cannot get them off this campus with a crowbar. I will be completely happy if you're aware that NCU exists, if you look at what NCU has to offer, and if you prayerfully consider that The one thing that I would add from this video and this discussion is if your criteria up until now, the ones that have been locked into place, include big endowment, very well funded, and names I recognize among the faculty, well, the Pharisees had criteria locked into place too, and they missed the boat. So, really, I guess the whole thrust of it is, when you go to God, go humbly, which I think is a pretty sound scriptural principle, and whatever college you wind up choosing, as I've said before, we are all building the same kingdom, and my best wishes and prayers go with you all along the way.